Alright, so I think I have a pretty good setup here, and I think you can see pretty well. Once you trace your leaves onto your paper, basically you don't want them to be too dark. Like mine are really too dark, and what that's going to do is it's going to mix, your pencil's going to mix with the watercolor paint, and it's going to make it look kind of muddy, especially if you use yellow. So you want to take an eraser. This is actually it's an art eraser, it's a gummy eraser. It's kind of like silly putty. You can stretch it around and mold it, and it's actually really fun to play with. But use any kind of eraser, and I would just go over some of your lines and just sort of lighten them up so that you don't have so much of the pencil that will blend in with your paint, and because you don't want it to get muddied. I'm going to go through my whole composition and just kind of lighten it up. I don't want to erase it entirely because then I won't be able to see my leaves anymore. I'm going to use yellow as probably my first layer on my leaves because it's nice and bright, and yellow will show through the other colors and provide a nice glaze color. But I'm going to think about my colors first before I start painting. It's always good to plan. Figure out what you're going to do before you hit it with paint, because once you hit it with paint, it's really hard to take it away. There you see I've lightened up my pencil. Watercolor paint is transparent, so the pencil will show through. So the lighter it is, the better. Also, when you're doing your composition, you traced and you did a lot of overlapping, so you have to figure out what's going to go on top and what's going to go underneath. So you'll notice on my branch, I've kind of got the branch and the leaf both traced, and you can't really have that. So you need to decide what's going to be on top and what's going to be underneath. So I want I think I want my leaf to be on top. So if I want my leaf to be on top, I have to completely erase the branch. And I recommend using an H pencil because an H is lighter than an HB. I have the branch over the leaf again, which is just, I mean, something like this, it's going to be easier to just leave. But if you wanted the branch under the leaf, you would just erase the branch and put the veins back on your leaf. But for simplicity, I'm going to just leave it. Alright, looks like I'm ready to start. I don't have any shadows, and the arrangement we did, we actually didn't have a light source for shadows, so I'm going to have to go ahead and put them in. But first I need to decide what direction my light is coming from, and so if my light is coming from over here, my shadows are going to be on the other side of the leaf, or vice versa. And we all know that shadows take on the form that they are cast from. I guess I'll just have the light coming from this direction. You just kind of go ahead, it's almost like you're tracing. Come in here, add a shadow there. If you make your shadow separated from your branch, it makes it look like the branch is kind of up. And you might have shadows that actually go on top of your leaves. Because that's how it would be in nature. And if I have this curl here, I'd probably see the shadow of that curl underneath this, because it's curling over. So you might see the shadow below it. The next thing I'm going to do is start putting on my first glaze. I've got my paint palette here. I like to put it on an enamel tray. And again, you need to squeeze all your watercolors out ahead of time if you're using tubes. And they need to dry because watercolor is wet. So you need to wet it to use it. And you should never use watercolor paint straight out of the tube. It will use up all your paint, and it won't work as well as when you do it this way. I'm actually going to start and put my glazes on, and I'm going to use yellow, but I'll probably do like a little bit of pink too, and I'll probably mix it up. I do have different size brushes here. And I'll just show you. I like my brushes to be in something like this. I can roll it up and tie it and take it with me. So this is really good if you're going out on location, outside to paint. But it just keeps your brushes really nice if you're going to invest in good brushes, which I really do recommend. You need to have good brushes, or you're not going to be able to put the paint on well if you don't. take some water and you're going to wet your paint. And I'm going to do my leaves first. You can do your background first. It doesn't really matter. I'm just going to go in and lay down a glaze. Now, if you put your paint on too thick, too bright, and you don't want it this bright, what you do is you just rinse off your brush. And now I'm just painting with water. It just thins it out. And you don't need to put paint on your brush every time. You can just use the water to spread it around. And it depends on, you know, how thick you want your paint, but it's always better to use a little bit because you can always add more paint on. You can always make it darker. Also, you never want to scrub with your brush like this. This is really bad for your brush. You don't ever want to do that. You want to take nice strokes with your brush and, you know, back and forth. You can outline your leaf if you want. Just remember that you want to keep your edges wet. It helps so that you don't have a line. So like if this edge dried right there, I might have a line, but by keeping your edges wet and moving all the time, you will have a more uniform looking piece. Now I just did wet on dry. My paper was dry, my brush was wet. And notice how my pencil is showing through, even though I've erased it. It's good to get your pencil pretty light. If I did it too light, you probably wouldn't be able to see what I'm doing. So now I'm going to do wet on wet. So I'm going to take this leaf right here and I'm going to wet it just with water. I don't even know if you can see that. I just have water on my brush. No paint. So wherever I wet the paper is where my paint is going to end up going. It will bleed. It's called bleeding when it moves. Now also be aware that if you paint two areas next to each other that are wet, this leaf is wet. This leaf is wet. So when I add paint to this leaf, it's going to bleed into that leaf. And that has to be a decision that you want to make. It happens as an accident a lot, especially if you're impatient like I am. You can also use a blow dryer and dry it. A lot of people who do watercolor use blow dryers. So for instance, if I put this here, it's probably going to bleed into my yellow leaf. Oh, maybe it won't. And when I put the paint down, it bleeds because this is wet on wet. It has a different look to it. It's kind of a washy, watery look. It depends on what you're going for. I like it for the background. Makes the background look loose. It's really hard to control your watercolor paint sometimes if you use wet on wet. You can control it better with wet on dry. So if you really want to control your paint exactly where you want it to go, use wet on dry. If you don't really care and you want to see what happens, use wet on wet. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to do my whole first layer of glaze on all my leaves. Again, if you have not enough paint, you just add more. If you have too much paint, you add some water to thin it out. You don't want watercolor paint to be too thick and opaque. That's not the nature of it, and that's not how it should look. It's supposed to be kind of thin and washy and watery. Also, if you're in an area where you have a hard time reaching, I always turn my paper so that I can get the best possible angle that I need in order to control what I'm doing. Be sure to balance your colors, and it's always better to limit your color palette so that you don't have too many colors going on. I'm probably going to do these all pink, and maybe I'll do these yellow. That was sort of my plan. And then once it's dry, I will show you how to do the next layer of glaze. Okay, there you have it. I'm not going to do anything else right now because this is wet, so I'm just going to let it dry. And then I'm going to come in and I'm going to show you how to do the veins of the leaves.